Thank you, members, for obliging me the opportunity to make this presentation. Madam Speaker, as it's our practice, the statements will be provided to the Leader of Opposition Business and the Opposition spokesperson. And I believe that is being done now. Madam Speaker, the rains we experienced over the last few days were in part due to a broad area of low pressure over the Western Caribbean, which is usual for the month of October, sometimes even into November. However, we also had to contend with the outer bands of Tropical Storm Zeta, which developed west of Jamaica. The traditional peak of the September to November primary rainfall season occurs in October and is expected to provide enough rainfall to last through the December to March dry period. And from what we have seen, though we have not yet had the official report from the Met Office, we have had significant rainfalls which we hope would have recharged our aquifers. Certainly our dams have been filled to capacity now. Madam Speaker, you will recall that in 2018, around this time, we had heavy rainfalls across the island and indeed flooding in some areas. For example, in May Pen, I believe during that period of time, one youngster perished in flooding. Now, various climate phenomena such as La Nina can result in increased tropical cyclone activity and the development of significant rainfall in the Caribbean, this representing greater variability in our weather patterns. However, we must also contend with the real effects of climate change on our weather and environment, which leads to more intense weather events and rainfall episodes, meaning higher volumes and shorter periods of rainfall. As well, in the converse, as more intense and longer periods of drought. So with 34 days remaining in the hurricane season, that is the 2020 hurricane season, this year has now tied with 2005 for the largest number of named storms in any season on record. Our government is informed by the science and expects and plans for these weather events, though admittedly it is difficult to predict with certainty the intensity and duration of the weather events when they happen. Certainly, currently, the advice from the Met Office is that a high pressure ridge is dominating in our area, and therefore we will have fairer weather today, possibly tomorrow. However, this could change again on Thursday when another trough enters our area and could again increase rainfall in our country in another few days. This, therefore, will inform our response tactic to the weather events. There are some areas for which it doesn't make sense to address it until after the rains have subsided. For example, those areas that may have soil stability issues. But then there are other areas which you must address before the next spell of rainfall, particularly those areas that are likely to flood. So we take the break that we are given to clear drains, clear gullies, to make sure that when the next spell of rain happens, there is no flooding. Madam Speaker, the torrential rains associated with Tropical Storm Zeta that spanned 6 days from October 19 to 25 have severely impacted several communities across the island. There have been reports of damage to road infrastructure in all 14 parishes. Regrettably, Madam Speaker, a landslide in the Shooters Hill area of St. Andrew resulted in the deaths of 2 persons, a father and his 15-year-old daughter. The government is deeply saddened by this event, and we offer our sympathies and indeed support to the family and to the community. The National Works Agency has been mobilizing equipment and personnel to clear blocked roads and restore access to communities. The NWA's preliminary assessment is that over 80 roads island-wide were severely affected by various rain-related events such as landslides, mud flows, downed trees, washed out bridges, undermined roadways, or inundation, which rendered some communities inaccessible and even marooned. The preliminary assessment indicates that the southern parishes were more affected than the northern parishes. Madam Speaker, I have been informed by the NWA, and they've specifically asked me to make this point, that based on inspection and field reports that they have conducted, none of the recently completed roads, Constant Spring Road, Hagley Park Road, Barbican Road, and Camp Road, have been adversely affected. This is contrary to some of the statements that are being made publicly. Madam Speaker, I am informed that we now have 6 corridors, including the Bogwalk Gorge in St. Catherine, that remain closed. I expect that the Bogwalk Gorge will be reopened today based on where the NWA would have reached with the cleaning and clearing exercise. I am advised that several truckloads of sand and debris were removed and special equipment had to be brought in to break up and remove huge boulders dislodged from hillsides. The other roads that remain impassable are Old Harbour to Barton's, Big Pond in St. Catherine, Rock River to Ginger Ridge, and Thompson Town to Victoria in Clarendon, Papine to Bull Bay in St. Andrew at Cane River, and Milk River to Alligator Pond in Manchester. Madam Speaker, the estimate for flood damage included in the report that has been presented by the NWA is preliminary, as the agency is unable to access all points in the field in order to comprehensively assess the extent of the damage to infrastructure and the cost of permanent repairs. The preliminary damage estimate, Madam Speaker, is close to 2 billion Jamaican dollars, and that's preliminary. And my assessment from what I have been seeing and what has been reported is that the estimate will rise significantly. This covers road clearance, drain cleaning, creating access, and patching, but it does not include the cost of permanent repairs or major rehabilitation. So this $2 billion would only cover what would be needed, for example, to clear the gorge or the roadways that have been made impassable, to clear certain landslides and land slippage, to patch certain roads to allow for the smooth flow of traffic, and to undertake clearing of drains and gullies and so forth. But if there were, for example, a collapsed bridge or a collapsed road, that would not be within this $2 billion amount. Madam Speaker, in addition to the impact on the NWA roads, there has been significant impact on parochial roads. 60% of parochial roads were affected, with the KSA, St. Catherine, Clarendon, and Manchester being those most greatly affected. The estimate is being finalized, but preliminary indications are that the damage to parochial roads and drain networks will run in excess of $700 million. Madam Speaker, based on the extent of damage and the cost, all the required works cannot be immediately done. Accordingly, the government is proposing a program of targeted interventions with a priority ranking as follows. First priority would be to reopen blocked roads. Then cleaning of critical drains, which are now heavily silted, and then patching of main thoroughfares. Madam Speaker, the government recognizes that the Christmas season will soon be here. It is also the time when we undertake our cyclical maintenance and mitigation work programs on public infrastructure across the island. An element of our routine maintenance program is driven on a constituency basis, and that is usually referred to as the Christmas work program. So I just want to remind our members of Parliament that there is no separate program for Christmas work as distinct from routine cyclical maintenance and mitigation. It so happens that at the end of the rainy season, that is the October to November rainy season, we enter upon a period of mitigation, rehabilitation, and that coincides with Christmas. And what has happened traditionally is that we call this cyclical mitigation program Christmas work. Over the last 4 years, we have changed the nature of how that program has been traditionally executed. And indeed, more than changed the nature, we have expanded the program. I recall when I came into the Parliament, the program was somewhere in the region of about 150,000, 500,000 Jamaican dollars. Certainly when Minister Samuda was in the Parliament, it would have been far less. Now, members of Parliament can look forward to in excess of $10 million towards mitigation and rehabilitation works at Christmas time in their constituency. But it is not separate from the normal cyclical rehabilitation work that is done. I'm making this point, Madam Speaker, because we do not have unlimited resources. And therefore, we will have to use the cyclical mitigation program and augment it with reallocations that we have had to decide upon to address the fallout as a result of the rainfall. One of the reasons, Madam Speaker, why I am making the statement at this point in time is that I've had to be involved in an exercise to go through certain areas of the budget in order to make reallocations so that the government is able to. The Minister of Finance, I'm certain, was sitting there with bated breath to hear me say this statement, that this is about reallocation and not about new funding, as we have already gone through the second supplementary estimates, and therefore there is no additional funding for the government's response. This is now about each ministry, each minister, each permanent secretary going through their budget line item by line item to see what it is that we can reallocate. And this will be supervised, obviously, by the Ministry of Finance. And I did that process today, going through the Ministry of Economic Growth and Job Creation budget to see what we would be able to do. And I was supported in that regard by the Minister of Labour and Social Security. who went through his budget to see what he can do to ensure that those who have been affected island-wide, that there is some response for them. I see the Minister of Tourism nodding. He will tell me that he doesn't have a budget that can be reallocated. But I recommend to all the ministers here to look in your budget very carefully to see what we can do in terms of reallocation to ensure that all Jamaicans who have been dislocated and severely impacted by these heavy rains, that there is some form of outreach to them. Madam Speaker, we do not have, as I've said, limited resources, and therefore we must be strategic in how we allocate and use those scarce resources. Therefore, the cyclical mitigation program will begin shortly and lead into the Christmas period and will be augmented to address the repair and rehabilitation works associated with the rains that will total approximately 2 billion Jamaican dollars. So at this time, we will budget to expend $1 billion to directly address damage due to rains, and this is to be used directly by the NWA according to areas of greatest national need and strategic importance to the productivity of the economy. So that's immediately, as soon as the Ministry of Finance is able to lay hands on those funds, that will be available to start the rehabilitation and repair process according to the strategic direction that was given earlier. So we will be looking at clearing block roads, desilting drains and clearing drains, patching roads. But the overall strategic, of course, perspective is we will have to look at where is the area of greatest need, and something we have to come to terms with, Madam Speaker, in this constituency. You know, yes, the rain falls on everyone's house top, but some houses got damaged more significantly than others. Not all constituencies face the same level of damage and dislocation. So the NWA has to look carefully at where the damage is and use the $1 billion accordingly. And then, Madam Speaker, you would have seen the reports about the impact of the pandemic on our economy, the fall off in economic growth and the subsequent fall off in employment. Any resource allocation and expenditure must have in mind how we are going to stimulate the economy and how we are going to ensure that we get the economy back on full production. So we have to look at the roads and infrastructure that we need to get back to full operation in order to support the economy. And the NWA has been so guided. Furthermore, Madam Speaker, in addition, that is, to the $1 billion, each constituency will be allocated $1.5 million from the Housing Fund to assist with repairs to housing infrastructure that has been brought to the attention of the Member of Parliament. Some MPs, even though I'm getting a good rapping on the desk, suggesting that this is a good move, there are those who are petrified of such announcements. Because I say 1.5 million, but what is heard is a figure multiple of this. Yes. And the pressures will start to build. It's for individuals. So I wish to say that the 1.5 million, it may sound like a large sum, but if you were to consider that over 100 houses that you may have to address, it doesn't come down to much. And therefore, I'm urging constituents to be reasonable. I mean, it's a difficult time, understand, but the government has to operate within the boundaries of its resources. And this is what we are doing. But this is the start. As we go through and we decide on reallocation, we may be able to do more. But this is so that MPs are not flat-footed in the face of requests. And I know as you go through your constituency, and as I will be going into my constituency, and as I plan my island-wide tour now to actually see the damage firsthand, we may have to make other allocations to support the response. But we will begin with 1.5 million from the housing fund for each member of parliament, for each constituency rather. And in addition to that, Madam Speaker, we will give each constituency an allocation of 1.5 million from the Ministry of Labour and Social Security for rehabilitation grants for the neediest cases that are brought to the attention of the MPs. So, in effect, constituencies will have a $3 million early response fund, which you should consider this as part of the cyclical mitigation program. It's just that you are getting it a little bit earlier.
Christmas. That will come.
You just get it a little earlier, that's it. Madam Speaker, disasters such as this expose the importance of proper urban and rural planning. Madam Speaker, you will note that in this iteration of the administration, in this new term, we have both an element distinctly defined for urban renewal in the government, a ministry that is focusing on that, and the Ministry of Local Government is also configured such to focus on rural development. It was a considered position, Madam Speaker, because we recognize, as I said earlier in my presentation, that climate variability and climate change and more intense weather events will have significant impact on how our economy and our society develops. We have, for a long time, Madam Speaker, not taken weather and climate as a significant element of consideration in how we design and build and plan our city and our built environment. That cannot continue to be the case. I've been listening keenly and following the public discourse on the floodings that have taken place in various areas, and in particularly in the corporate area regarding our roads. Much of the conversation has centered upon quality of workmanship, the absence of drain and gullies. And let me be clear, Madam Speaker, we cannot discount that we have shoddy workmen, shoddy contractors. We can't discount that. We cannot discount that supervision of works can be much better than it currently is. That is not to be discounted. But I would also want the public commentators who are very important and influential in widening and deepening the understanding of the public about these issues, and which will ensure the correct response from the public when the government puts forward policy. The public debate, therefore, should also consider that we have not done any major infrastructure upgrade and improvement to account for the variabilities that are happening in our climate and the impact of climate change. We are still depending on the Sandy Gully to take off water off Kingston. When the Sandy Gully was built, significant areas of Kingston were not developed. we don't consider that each road, each new road that we pave, each new roof that we build, each new house that we build with a roof that has a runoff, increases the volume of water that has to be carried in the gullies that were built 50 years ago and the drains that were built 50 years ago. We don't talk about that. And when we go to be stringent on the building codes and the building plans that the building codes and regulations, and there is this constant struggle between loosening the building requirements so that more construction can happen and more houses can be built versus protecting the environment and securing the property that we currently have and the public infrastructure. The drains that we have, which were built 50 years ago, simply cannot carry the volume of water that comes now, both as a result of climate variabilities and climate change, more intense weather events that are happening, but also we have impacted our own environment by paving much more areas and having more roads. So the percentage of permeable area that we have to allow for water seepage into the soil, that's gone. So the water has to go somewhere. So it is going to go on our roads, and hopefully they will get into some of the drains. But there is also the other factor. So it's one thing that the drains are small, but the drains are also blocked. Because unfortunately, Madam Speaker, we use our drains and gullies as garbage disposal areas. So it's one thing that the drains carrying capacity might be small, but if there is a tree branch that is turned perpendicular to the flow of the drain, and then that tree branch is then further blocking plastic bottles and mattresses and beds and all kinds of things that are thrown into the gully so no water can move, then you will definitely have flooding. So the conversation about the flooding and the other impacts must also carry these significant points: that our climate and weather is variable. There is this overarching phenomenon of climate change, which is making variable weather even more intense. And then how we as human beings choose to treat our environment is also having an impact. So, Madam Speaker, the intention behind having rural development as a distinct part of a portfolio and urban development as a distinct part of the portfolio is precisely to address this question as to what kind of built environment we're going to have and how will people in this environment live and respond to the environment. That's the real question. That's the real purpose of the new Ministry of Urban Development, Urban Renewal, and Rural Development. Because, Madam Speaker, we have to now put in place policies that will seek to ensure that we get Jamaicans to choose to live where it is environmentally safe. I'm making this presentation, Madam Speaker, knowing well that there is no edict that the government can give that will change what has happened centuries now. It's not going to change it overnight. Madam Speaker, when emancipation was fought for and eventually won in this country, our forefathers decided not to stay on the plantations, but to take to the hills where they could genuinely and truly secure their freedom. It may have been fine then to put a little tattoo somewhere and build and clear some land and farm.
Slash and burn.
But as we now become our own state and society, we control this place now. We're not running and hiding from anybody. And in the face of these significant weather events, houses perched on hillsides, which have been denuded, we know those houses are going to be at risk. That is the case. We know we're going to have landslides. Houses built on marginal lands, such as on gully banks. We know that when there is significant rain, which we know will come because of the weather events that we are now having, which are more intense, that these houses are going to be flooded out. At some point, as a society, we must come to the understanding that you cannot choose to go and live anywhere you feel. There are some areas which we will have to declare as no-build zones. And there are some areas, regardless of the political implications, if we could only reach across the aisle and shake hands on it and come to an understanding on it, that there are some communities which shouldn't be where they are. They can't. And Madam Speaker, we shouldn't wait until there is a disaster.
And wetlands and all those places, yes.
And then we come and say, well,
Swamp and
you know, they settle there irregularly and it is their fault. We know that it is going to happen. We know that there is going to come a weather event where and we've seen it, the landslide that happened in East Rural, St. Andrew, where unfortunately, as I've said, 2 persons perished. You can see that that's a difficult place to build. And we have seen houses that are perched on hillsides as the soil moves because it has become inundated with rain. Those houses are at risk. We have seen people building on gully banks, and as soon as the gully walls are undermined and taken away, you see those houses at risk. But then comes the question, where do we live? So, Madam Speaker, government has to develop a clear policy on urbanization and planned communities. And that is now the task of the new Ministry of Urban Renewal. We have to develop that. When we made the commitment to build 70,000 new houses, Madam Speaker, it wasn't a political promise. We need to be able to build that and make them affordable so we can attract people from going to take up marginal lands, hillside lands, unsafe lands to build on, to come and reside in formally developed and constructed communities. It is going to take some time, but I wish to assure the nation that we are serious about making Jamaica a safe and resilient country. And part of the resilience is that we must build where we know there will be a disaster looming.
nice work.
So, Madam Speaker, I just thought I would share these thoughts with you and the rest of the Parliament. The resources that I have spoken about, the members of Parliament will be written to. We will try to mobilize them very quickly so that you are able to provide the assistance onward to your constituents who are definitely in need. Thank you, Madam Speaker. Thank you.